communities that met certain population density thresholds had to comply with this law. So about half of the communities, the towns and villages in Orange County, all of the cities are subject to this same general permit. And in a way, they kind of made it easy for communities because you didn't have to start from scratch to make up your whole stormwater prevention plan. They came up with these 6 minimum measures, which leave you some ability for creativity or how aggressive you want to be in the program, but basically you just put on paper to document that you've met these 6 minimum measures and then you've complied with the general permit. And as the commissioner said, each year you have to do an annual report to sort of document that you're continuing your work on this. It's not just a matter of writing a plan at the beginning and then putting it on a shelf. So that's kind of the overall background and purpose of it. And as was mentioned, the first minimum measure is called public education and outreach. So that's what we're doing here tonight. And I gave you each a packet of handouts that you can read at your leisure that might make you think about other projects that the city might get involved in, or as the commissioner said, to have your eyes open to certain things that might be cause for concern. And we have publications like that usually are on the counter in the commissioner's office and available for the public when they come in. We used to have an educator that went around to the schools, including a lot of Middletown schools. That person retired, and because of funding considerations, we weren't able to continue doing that. But for a long time, we were able to help out all the MS4 communities by going into the schools with a stormwater education program, and then they could sort of take credit for that and put it on their annual reports. So the second measure is called public participation and involvement. So that's a little bit different. It's not just a matter of presenting information to the public, it's a matter of trying to get them involved, not only in developing the stormwater program, but also in other stewardship and similar activities that help to accomplish the goals of the overall program. So some examples of things like that would be tree planting projects, which we have done in the neighborhood around Middletown. We have done I think we did one that was actually within the city limits. And this year, we're actually working on a watershed management program for the whole Monhegan Brook watershed. And as part of that program, we're going to be planning a tree planting program, and we're going to be looking to see if we can get something up on the Psych Center grounds where the brook comes through up there. As I understand, that's owned by the college now, so we're going to make an outreach to them and see if we can get them to partner with us. So things like that would be considered public participation. Also cleanups. The last couple years, we've done a couple cleanups focused on the Monhegan Brook, and I know the city has their own cleanup day that would be another activity that would qualify as a public participation measure that kind of helps to address some of these stormwater runoff goals. So the third, those measures are kind of qualitative. I mean, they like you to make them into numbers. How many brochures did you hand out? How many stream plantings did you do? But they're still sort of qualitative. When you get into this illicit discharge detection and elimination, it starts to get a little more technical and quantitative. So for that measure, back at the beginning of this program, the city had to map all their stormwater outfalls. And that's basically anything that's coming out of a pipe or even a drainage ditch. And you could, as most of you probably know, the way Monhegan Brook comes through Middletown, that's kind of complicated because it goes underground, it comes back out again. Some of these outfalls are actually happening underground where you can't see them. And, somebody might try to say, well, our outfall is where Monhegan Brook goes into the Wallkill River, and we're done, there's our mapping. But of course, you're not going to get away with it that easy. So the city has done a lot of work mapping those outfalls. And one of the key things to keep in mind with this in terms of being out there and keeping your eyes open, the red flag for this illicit discharge is when you have a discharge from a stormwater pipe in dry weather conditions. So basically, stormwater is only going to go into the catch basins and into the pipes when it's raining. So if you have water that's constantly dripping out of something that should just be taking stormwater, it may not be an illicit discharge, but it's a red flag that we want to follow up on. It could be an illegal cross connection. It could just be somebody's footing drain, which is clean water. But that's kind of what we look for. So after doing that initial mapping, then what the city has to do is a certain number of the outfalls have to be checked every year for that, for those indicators that might cause you to have to do some further follow-up. So the fourth minimum control measure is construction site runoff control. And for a long time now, we've had this law that any site that disturbs more than 1 acre has to gain compliance under a different but related general permit. This is related to the MS4, but it's different. The developer has to apply for that permit, and it's, again, a general permit, and he gains coverage under that, and he's supposed to do certain erosion and sediment control measures on those sites. Not a lot of sites in the city are that big, so this is a lot. We deal with this a lot more in the towns where they have bigger developments that are open up more land at any given time. But one point I will make is that some communities have lowered that threshold even below 1 acre. And when that program first came in, a lot of builders couldn't believe that they need a permit just to disturb 1 acre. I mean, you could have that much disturbance on a single-family home site by the time you build the leach field and the house and the driveway and what have you. But some communities have taken that down to 1/4 acre or even lower. Because when all these little sites don't seem like a lot by themselves, they do add up to a bigger problem. And that goes for minimum control measure number 5 as well, the post-construction runoff control. And the distinction between those two things is sediment is our main issue when they're building because the site is opened up and the soils are unstable. Once those development sites get near completion, in most cases, we don't have an erosion problem because they're seeded down to lawns and other vegetation. But then the concern becomes the runoff from the impervious areas that are created. And again, some communities have lowered their thresholds so that even a small site in the city or a redevelopment of an old site, we would be looking for them to do certain runoff management measures, green infrastructure practices, things like that, things like we call rain gardens and other measures like that try to put that stormwater back in the ground as opposed to mainlining it right back into the stream through the storm drainage pipes. So those are the two measures that kind of follow one another, number 4 and 5, the construction site runoff control and the post-construction runoff control. So then the 6th and final minimum measure is called pollution prevention and good housekeeping. And this really comes back to the way the city operates its various departments that deal with the land. So you think of Parks Department, DPW, what are we doing around the highway garages, what kind of materials are we applying in the parks. So it's that whole land management thing. The potential sources of pollution from our municipal operations, we need to make sure that we have controls in place for those. And the other piece of this number 6 is the training aspect, and that makes sure that the folks that are working on these different measures, from whether it be from the Parks Department, DPW, or other departments, that they have training so that they're tuned into what they're doing and how that might affect the runoff. And Middletown has sent staff to trainings. We have trainings up here at Cooperative Extension 6 times a year, so it's pretty easy for the city and the other municipalities to get some of their folks up to those trainings and make sure they satisfy that staff training requirement. So I'll stop at that unless there's some questions. Yes, sir.
You said that some of the municipalities are reducing the threshold to 1/4 acre. Are any of those municipalities in our watershed? Are they doing that?
They're mostly to the south. It's closer to the city, Westchester County, and other areas of the country, especially the DC area and some areas in Texas. Pardon me? I'm not aware of any communities, they're having a hard enough time complying with the state's thresholds without bringing it down even lower, and I probably get a lot of pushback on something like that from the development community. But it's just something to keep in mind, you know, especially in a city where you're typically not gonna have, you know, a 10-acre development. You're gonna get a lot of smaller projects and a lot of redevelopment projects, and I'm sure the commissioner has and will keep you updated on a lot of the green infrastructure measures that are being planned right now for some of the downtown parking lots. So if that happens, then Middletown will be a real showcase for the kind of stormwater management stuff that is being promoted by the state. Yeah, Jerry.
On number 5, the post-construction runoff, where you have a lot of impervious surfaces and other things. If you find there's a problem, what kind of enforcement provisions are there for corrections? Are there any? Do you have any, or does the state have any, or?
Well, right now, it would be those thresholds that I mentioned. So
Local law. We have a
yes,
local law
the city had
that has
to.
the fines, and we can take to court and enforce them.
So if, and that would, in most every case in a new development, the planners from the city would make the applicant meet those requirements. So it's, you know, if anybody's out there building, in almost every case, they're doing it with some kind of a permit, whether it's a building permit. So once you come to the municipality for your permits, then they're gonna hold you to those stormwater runoff requirements if you meet those thresholds. So
Post-construction, we have our inspectors. We have to do annual inspection, like detention ponds and storm sewer system, like in Sterling Park, anywhere else. We are responsible to make sure that the detention ponds are maintained. Otherwise, we can take the developer to court.
now, on the sediment side of things, it's a little different. You can't really, it'd be very difficult to go out and take a water sample from a parking lot and say, you're polluting and, you know, we're gonna write you a ticket. But it's entirely different on a construction site. If you have sediment leaving your site and it's going into a stream and you can see a visible contrast to the background clarity of that stream, a conservation officer could write you a ticket right on the spot. That's a violation of water quality standards, so.
Thank you.
Kevin, who do you actually call for that if you do spot something like this? Do you call our department, the DPW, or DEC itself?
Yeah, if you're in an MS4 community, your first call should be to that community. If
Okay.
you were in a rural town that wasn't an MS4, then you could still call the building inspector, or you could call directly to DEC in New Paltz.
That was Kevin Sumner from the Orange County Conservation, Soil Conservation Department, and he came in here to give us an educational session about minimum measures for controlling runoff and for compliance as an MS4 community. And we thank Kevin very much. Every year he comes in here, and you know, he's really very knowledgeable in this aspect of the MS4 and implementing it. So thanks, Kevin.